What do you think of when you think of the respiratory system or the word respiration? Certain things should come into your mind, things like breathing, maybe the mitochondria, energy. Well, let's talk about respiration and breathing. In biology, we're talking about respiration as two different things, so you have to be careful which one we're referring to. If we're talking about cellular respiration, we're talking about when cells actually release energy from breaking down food or glucose in the presence of oxygen. And this is going to happen in the mitochondria. We take in glucose and oxygen, and then we're going to produce the waste product, carbon dioxide and water, and end up with energy, or ATP. Respiration is actually the process of gas exchange, where we're bringing oxygen into the body and pushing carbon dioxide out. And breathing is the process of inhaling and exhaling. So respiration is going to refer to producing energy or releasing energy from cells, or gas exchange. And breathing is really just inhaling and exhaling. Inhaling, bringing oxygen in. Exhaling is actually removing that waste carbon dioxide. The respiratory system not only allows us to breathe so that we have the um, needed nutrients, but um, it's really the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the air, the blood, and the tissues. It's going to warm and moisten as well as filter the air that we breathe. And we can look at all these structures. The respiratory system is going to consist of the nose and the mouth, the epiglottis, which you've heard from in the digestive system, the pharynx as well, larynx, which is the voice box, the trachea, or the windpipe, the lungs. There's two. Anytime you hear like pulmonary, we're talking about lungs or pleural tissue. The bronchus is a large tube leading into each of the lungs that branches off from the trachea, and the bronchioles are the smaller tubes that branch off of each bronchus. And of course the diaphragm, which is the strong muscle that is at the base of the cavity. Air is going to enter the nose or the mouth and move to the pharynx or throat. Now, pharynx is that opening to the throat. The nose is going to have, if you've ever had to blow your nose, you know that there's mucus in there. That's going to help actually warm the air. And there's hairs in there, so they're going to filter the air so that it cleans it a little bit before it enters the pharynx. And the pharynx is going to be that passageway for both food and air. So the epiglottis, remember that little punching bag at the back of the throat, it normally covers the trachea when you're swallowing food. Well, now it's going to cover the esophagus so that air can move through the pharynx. And as it moves through the pharynx, it's actually going to cover the esophagus. Air is going to move into the trachea. Now, remember, if you feel the front of your throat right now, you can feel, kind of hard ring-like structures. Well, those are the cartilaginous rings that are actually holding the trachea open. So that's where you're feeling. And at the top of the trachea is the larynx, which is also called the voice box. And there's two elastic folds of tissue called vocal cords in there. And that's what these actually look like. So here, you see these two folds. These are the vocal cords. If we look at how they work, we can see that as air is going to pass through them, they're going to vibrate. So here we look at voice. Here's your vocal cords. Now as these are open, and then as they get tighter, and this is what we learn to do, we learn how to control the air going through so we can actually control what the sounds are. The vocal cords, the pitch is going to change. Then as the air passes through the trachea into the passageways, in order to get into each lung, it's going to pass through the bronchus. So we have one bronchi tube that goes into each lung, and then each bronchi tube is going to divide up into these little bronchioles, which are much smaller. You can see them branch out in the lung here. At the end of each bronchiole, there's millions of tiny little air sacs called alveoli. And alveoli are kind of grouped like clusters of grapes. And around each alveolus is a network of capillaries. And we can see that we have a pulmonary artery. And arteries are typically colored in red because they're carrying oxygenated blood, but this is a special one in the body. It's carrying deoxygenated blood. And this blood is actually coming from the heart to pick up the oxygen and exchange the carbon dioxide that it has so that it can be oxygen rich and carries it back through this pulmonary vein to the heart so that the heart can pump it to the rest of the body. So these capillaries, remember, are only one cell thick. And because they're only one cell thick, we can have this gas exchange occur where oxygen is going to move into the bloodstream and the blood cells are going to pick up that oxygen and carry it back to the heart. And then the carbon dioxide is going to move from the blood to the alveolus so that it can be exhaled and removed from the body. Now if we look at breathing, the bottom of the cavity here, you have your rib cage, and inside is a space, and that's where the lungs are, and we call that a cavity. Um, there's a flat muscle called the diaphragm, and the diaphragm is going to be responsible for driving air into the lungs from air pressure. It's going to actually change the air pressure in the cavity. So if there was something that happened to the lung cavity, if there was a puncture in there, it would change the air pressure so the lungs actually could not fill up and the person would struggle to breathe. When we inhale or we bring air in, the rib cage is actually going to rise and the diaphragm contracts and comes down so that the lungs can fill up. So if you take a deep breath right now, just keep your hand kind of at the base of your ribs. You can feel your rib cage expand and it's going to rise, and that muscle at the bottom is actually tightening and it's going to come down. The opposite happens when we exhale. The rib cage is going to lower and the diaphragm relaxes, and when it relaxes, it's going to go back up, so it pushes the air back out of the lungs. And if we look at how this works, we can see this bell jar here represents the same pressure cavity that we would have when we move the diaphragm up. Okay, it's actually relaxing, it moves upward. It's going to push air out of the lungs. When it contracts and comes down, the lungs can fill because the air pressure has changed. So there's, more pressure outside than inside, so the air is going to rush in. And then the opposite happens when we exhale. So what controls breathing? Well, you should be saying that it's, an unconscious event. It's involuntary. We do it. We're not telling ourselves when to breathe. And the medulla oblongata at the base of the brain here is actually the control area for breathing. And sometimes you think that oxygen is what we need and that's what controls it, but it's actually carbon dioxide. So this part of the brain is going to sense the carbon dioxide levels in the blood, and that's going to tell the body to either increase breathing or decrease. So when the carbon dioxide level is really high, we actually need to breathe faster because we need to get rid of the carbon dioxide so that we can bring in more oxygen. So those messages are going to be sent from the brain to the rib muscles and diaphragm to help increase the rate of respiration or breathing. Now, we can look at some problems in the respiratory system, and bronchitis is a common one. Now, itis actually stands for the inflammation of, and so you know the term bronchi now. Well, it's inflammation of the bronchi tubes, and this is actually because there's a buildup of mucus, and that makes it really hard to breathe, and that causes coughing because it's a reflex to try and help us breathe. So you can see this is a normal bronchi tube here, and this is one that has bronchitis, or it's very swollen and inflamed with all that mucus inside. Another one is asthma, which is actually an allergic reaction which causes the bronchi tubes to narrow. So they're going to constrict. So it's almost like taking a garden hose and squeezing it shut. The water can't move through it. Well, that's what's happening when someone's having an asthma attack. And so they need to take medicine that's going to help open those passageways again so air can move through. And then there's emphysema. And in this disease, what happens is the walls of the alveoli actually break down, and they're going to break down and they're not as elastic, and gas exchange really can't occur. And the surface area for gas exchange is decreased. So now we don't have as much gas exchange going on, so we're not getting rid of all that carbon dioxide as a waste product and bringing in the good oxygen for our cells to function and release energy. As a result, there's a shortness of breath and difficulty in breathing and decreased lung capacity. So a lot of times people that have emphysema need to take, oxygen. They'll have an oxygen tank and they hook up to it so that they can get the oxygen into their body kind of artificially. And, their active life is decreased a lot because they don't have the energy that they would need in order to function. And then we'll talk about lung cancer. And this is what happens to a lung when there's lung cancer. We've talked about cancer before as being a very aggressive, uncontrolled cell growth. And the lung is actually going to start kind of breaking down because those bad cells are going to take over. And a lot of those diseases, emphysema and lung cancer especially, are attributed to smoking. Now, if we take a look at the contents of cigarette, you're looking at all of these chemicals. And some of these you'd find in other things, like acetone, you find in nail polish remover, ammonia is in like toilet cleaner, arsenic, well, that's rat poison. Butane is found in lighter fluid, cadmium is in batteries, carbon monoxide is the silent killer. DDT, which is an insecticide, formaldehyde, hexamine, hydrazine, methane. There's all of these terrible chemicals in there, and these are going to negatively affect the lungs and the capacity to breathe.